Right, welcome, gentlemen, to our second session. So far, it's just the three of us, but in the interest of time, I think let's go ahead and continue with where we left off and what we agreed to cover in today's meeting. Well, basically, today's meeting, we're going to be looking at setting up the Angular environment so that we make best use of the plugins that are available for making Angular development much easier. Today's session will be hosted by me, Mayenziwe Sibanda, following after Gilbert Kotora and his first session, basically introducing Angular as a framework for producing applications. So carrying on from where he left off, we'll basically fine-tune our chosen editor, VSCode, in order for us to prepare to create our fuelFinder application. This application was chosen by a consensus in the team, so I don't expect that we have any challenges with trying to figure out why did we choose the application, why didn't we choose something else. I think so far we are all in agreement to create an application that solves the challenge that a lot of us here in Zimbabwe are facing in terms of knowing where to get your fuel from, be it petrol, diesel, or paraffin, by also gauging how long the queue is, what forms of payment that they're taking. There's a lot of features that people submitted during discussions. But so far today, we're just going to look at creating a suitable environment for VSCode and Angular development. So here goes. Basically, I think I'll run through how far we had gone from our last discussion, where Gilbert took us through installing Angular and running through a few applications. I mean, creating components based on the guide. So in short, what we need to do is to download and install VSCode. So we get that from the internet, where straight from your browser. For example, if you do type VSCode in a search engine, it gives you a direct link where you can download the VSCode, the latest version. It's quite a heavy download. I assume a lot of people have downloaded it by now. So I'll just step on in the assumption that you've downloaded and installed VSCode. So my VSCode download is available here. It's like 56 megabytes or so. Okay. Okay, I won't find it there, but I downloaded it and then I installed it. This is what we get. Basically, whenever we open our VSCode, we get the welcome screen, Visual Studio. From the welcome screen, you can immediately, for the first time, set up tools and enhancements for JavaScript, for TypeScript, for Python, PHP, and so many other programming languages. So this is VSCode, the one that we're going to use, I suppose, by most people. We're going to use it when we do our Angular development. It comes with a whole lot of plugins that makes all this Angular development so easy. Feel free to show me your hands if you have any questions, and then I'll continue there. So far, this is what we have, our VSCode. I've already done a few steps ahead, but this was so that we have the maximum use of the short time that we have for this meeting. What's important for us today is when we come to this extensions tab, after you initially install VS Code, there'll be no extensions that are installed here. The one that I encourage people to install is the one that you get when you type in Angular Essentials by John Papa. This one here. This one more or less is like a bootstrap. It picks up all the plugins that we require, all the plugins that we'll ever need. And it's got a bundle, and it picks up everything that you'll ever need, including TypeScript lint, including JavaScript lint, some of the IntelliSense, all the stuff is here. So we don't need to worry, everything is there. And it installs everything in one go. So that's like a jackknife, one thing that you'll ever need, and it installs everything. So after it's done, more or less, your Angular will be almost ready. What will be left is actually writing the code as required for you to write the code. Pay attention to what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that now you have your plugins, but they will not write your code for you. You still have to write your own code. So where we start after installing our VS Code is we also install Git. You remember we agreed to do this as a group, and as a group, we need to be able to contribute to the project whenever we can. And whenever we contribute to the project, we're saying we'd like people to keep up to date with the changes so that you don't overwrite somebody's necessary code. I want us today to talk through the process of committing, the process of pulling, the process of pushing, the process of initially cloning. I think you only ever clone once unless you have corrupted your repository, local repository cache. But otherwise, we'll speak mostly about committing, about pushing, and about pulling. Please raise your hands if you're following. Right, thank you very much. So to begin with, as Team 60, we have chosen to do a fuelFinder application. So in preparation for us having a fuelFinder application that works to alert its users where to get fuel or gives them information for them to make such a decision, we have agreed to do it as a group. So as a group, we are called Team 60. And as Team 60, I have set up a Git repository on GitHub that we can use to actually collaborate. If you visit GitHub, this is the username that is currently in charge of our repository. So in your spare time, you may have to follow the instructions that I give, the example that I give, so that you are able to experiment by having the same copy of the application as we develop it going forward, as well as contributing, let's say, your own components, fixing of bugs, or any other tests that you contribute as part of the team. We haven't really ironed out that scope, but this is how far it has come in terms of being able to collaborate. So this is what we'll do. When you visit this link for the first time, I'll just remove this one. github.com/ALC4 MWS-team-60. You will actually arrive just at this page, but what we are actually concerned about is this fuelFinder application. So this is the dashboard that shows us the active repositories, active projects, basically the summary of activity about who is doing what. As you sign in, this is what you see. But what we're concerned about are the repositories. This one is a private repository that's created as an example tutorial when you sign up for GitHub. We're not concerned about that one. We're concerned about this one, our fuelFinder, which has been created for us to collaborate and create an Angular application. So when we see it here in GitHub, there's a brief summary where, for example, you normally write instructions if you have special instructions to people who are contributing to the project. But in this case, it's just a small description of why the project exists. We can always amend this. We can always beef it up. What's really important for us to notice is that there is a button here that's written clone or download. So this is how we'll mostly interact with the repository just for the first time. Most of all the other times we'll actually rely on the Git command line interface. Oh, which reminds me, we were supposed to install the Git. So we spoke about installing VSCode. We spoke about installing the plugins for VSCode. I skipped through installing Node.js and Angular because that was covered by Gilbert last week. Then I forgot to talk about installing Git. Forgive me, please. Let's just do that quickly. For us to install Git, we just you get this link if you go through a search engine, but if you can type it through, it's git-scm.com/downloads, where you can download a suitable Git client for your computer, be it you're on Windows, be it you're on Macintosh, be it you're on Linux. It will download a suitable client for you. But you can also get this if you type in, for example, for us people on Windows, if you just go through gitforwindows.org, it will actually still give you a Git client for Windows version. I think people are familiar with Git being inborn in Unix-based computer systems like Linux and Macintosh. It comes inborn as a version control tool available to developers who work in open source projects. So after you download this client, you just follow the prompts and it installs Git for you. And after it has installed Git, you'll actually notice that in your context menu here, you get Git. You can have a GUI or Git bash, where Git bash is the command line interface that we actually use to communicate with the Git service that we're running, the one that is keeping track of the versions that we are using or that we have built up for the application that we're contributing to. That's just in short about the Git. Having done this, I would like people to be also aware that we have access to Git commands from our VSCode terminal here. Right, this is the terminal. We can access it through there, like that. There are also keyboard shortcuts. But once we're in the terminal, we can run some Git operations. For example, this one, after you have been working, you might want to find out if you have made any changes that need to be committed, that need to be pushed onto the main branch, whichever branch that you're working on. We'll talk about those as well, about branches. Sometimes Git status will also let you know if you're behind. Let's say you're working as a group on a collective, maybe part of a component. Somebody's writing the HTML, somebody's writing the test, somebody's writing the testing. You'll find that Git will always update you if somebody has pushed something that you need to pull, or it will tell you you are behind by how many commits. We'll talk about it throughout most of this meeting, or you'll listen to me talk about it. But basically, we're going through version control, collaboration tools, as well as setting up an example component in the little time that we have. So where we began was cloning the project that we're working on as a group. This one here. When you click this button, you have the option of cloning using HTTPS or SSH. HTTPS is one of the easiest ways to clone a new project. It will never give you a lot of problems. But if you have superior skills, go ahead, use the SSH, which gives you a few more ways to manage the project after you have copied it. It's pretty straightforward. We click here to get the link. And then in any open directory, here I have this directory that's open. Let's just open another one just so that you see what I'm talking about. I'll just call this other. Then we'll work from our command line. Oh, I'm lost. Let's just do it manually. Right, in any empty folder like this one that I've created, you will type in git clone and then paste the link that you copied. As soon as you hit enter, Git is the one that the service will take over and copy the files that you require from the server online so that they become available to you for use. So that's the fuelFinder that it has copied from online so that we can use it. If you notice here, our fuelFinder app consists of a client and a database. So far, we're talking about the client side, which is Angular that we are going to develop in terms of communicating with our users. But in other projects, we'll also expect to have inside the first level of the folder, another folder associated with the backend. It can be called backend, it can be called database. It's up to us. We still have to have that kind of discussion. But so far, what I had done is create it as client. And then inside client, we actually have the fuelFinder app created by Angular. Gilbert covered creating an Angular app last week. So please forgive me for just brushing over it. I anticipated that people followed his discussion and took in everything he had to say. He gave us quite a lot of knowledge about how to create an Angular application. So following what we were talking about, after you clone this application that we are working on as a group, you will have the version of the application which is available on the server. I hope we understand each other. What that means is, as people contribute to the application, you also get their updated code. We'll work through some of the errors that we see from people who work in remote places. I'll say remote, somebody's in Harare, somebody in Bulawayo, they don't necessarily see each other. But sometimes you can be working even in the same building, working on the same piece of code. We'll talk about conflicts as well during our meeting. But now that you have cloned our project, I would like to just go back to where we were, our actual active projects, so that we catch up with what we were supposed to do. fuelFinder. The clients. Right, this is a list of our directories. So whenever you are in a Git controlled environment, wherever you are able to execute the Git commands. The Git commands are the ones we're going to work through very shortly to understand why they exist and why we need them. In short, we're talking about version control. We want to be able to keep up to date with changes so that if there's a problem, we can revert to a change and probably look back and say, well, this is what we wanted to achieve. Did we achieve it? Didn't we achieve it? What is the way forward? So looking at our application, this is a fresh copy of the Angular app, like I said, that we copied from the online server. So we'll just quickly generate components. Let's call it registration. So it's fuelFinder user registration. Generate component. So we need to run this from the application. Well, my PC is a bit slow, but so far, as you can see, it has created these files that we see here. And we can see that there are a few dots that were not there earlier. If we open this and we open the app, you'll see that it says here that app modules has been modified, right? It also says that this is a new folder. It has been created. So we actually have effected some changes in our application that somebody who is coding somewhere else, be it in the same building, in the same room, or in a different country, different continent, working on the same project that we're working on, does not have these changes. So in order for us to share them, we'll go through a few steps that are necessary when you're working in a Git version controlled environment. So if we type this command, git status, again, it tells us that we are on the master branch and we pulled whatever is on the master branch. We have it. It's up to date with what we have, except that we have new changes that have not been declared. And it also says there are new files that we have not told other people exist. So one of the first things that we do after we see such a report is we add the files that don't yet exist for everybody to have access to them. Is what we use git add all. So it adds all the files. So far here it was giving us warnings, but we can ignore these warnings. There's some differences between Linux and Windows, new line characters, but Git kind of figures that out some way or the other. I can't explain it. But we have added these files, right? We'll run our Git status again. And it shows us that we have acknowledged that we modified our app module. How did we modify our app module? Here, it will show us the before and the after. We imported a new component. Remember, we generated a new component, fuelFinder user registration. It was added in the imports. Then it was also added in our declarations. Remember that the Angular CLI takes care of all of this for us. Otherwise, you would actually have to manually do this, which is now different from the original file that was there. As you can see, there's a new line, the ones in green, and then the one in red, it just changed its position where it was. But this is the new file, right? And then it created new files. These are additions, the green ones. It created these new files as Angular so that we can fill in the gaps. This is a template. You remember it's a framework. So we'll be able to fill in the gaps in order to get the application running as soon as possible. Right. So what that means is, as far as our version control service is concerned, we changed a file and we created 4 new files. Then we registered these changes when we added all of these into, I forget the name of the file. But now that we have done this, we still have not told everybody what we have done. We want to be able to set a place in time where we'll say, this is what we did and this is why we did it. I hope people are following what I'm saying. So we're saying the next step after we have added these files under our version control is to actually make a commitment or to declare that this was a definite change that we want to remember. And why do we want to remember it? So typically, the instruction that we give is git commit. And we have the option to add a message. We can do the message string as part of the command, like what we're doing here. We can also write the message interactively. We'll look at both options. Let's look at the first one here, which is the message during the command. So we've written git commit -m. In this message, we are going to write edit the user registration component. Right? Watch what happens. It now gives us this number here. It's an auto-generated number based by some of the version control services that are running with Git. It gives us a commit number. Then it also gives us a commit message. So if you're doing this for the first time, actually, Git will ask you to register who you are because it will tell you, I don't know who you are. So some of the things that you need to do are to configure your email. and configure your name. I passed that stage already in preparing for this tutorial, but you should not be surprised when you see Git asking you to tell it who you are. So it's a simple command, and it will actually give you so that you can copy and paste. But often where you work as a freelancer, working in multiple projects, what you need to be aware of or careful about is not necessarily setting a global email or global ID for your Git service or your version control that you are running locally in your computer. So that is why it will be essential for you to write something like git config user.email. Then you put, it's like a property value pair. The property is the one that we have written here, user.email. And then the value is your email at domain.com. Just like that. That's for email. Then you also have to set, after that, your name, right? Where you write your name within the double quotes, which will be your name. I passed this stage already preparing for our tutorial. And this is where you see the information that we put there. It shows the username. It shows the commit number. And then the message that we wrote here. When you click on it, it shows you the files that were involved, what you changed, the additions, the subtractions, what did it look like before, what does it look like after. So all of this is really, really, really important for us to keep up to date with the changes so that we're able at some point to roll back, make like an undo, or to reclaim some code that we thought was useless and put it back into the project. It happens sometimes. No matter how perfect you are, sometimes it does happen that you think, I'd rather use the code that I had the first time. This is where it's important for us to keep version control. If you've done a lot of development without version control, you know how crazy it gets, where you think, but it was working before, why isn't it working now? You're now getting all sorts of errors. This is what we're talking about, version control. So this is from my initial commit and push. We're going to get into pushing very soon. This is from my initial setting up of the project. It shows that I affected 31 files were changed. It summarizes what happened, if there were any deletions, if there were additions, and the like. But in our case, what we wanted to do was, since now that we have committed, we want to be able to share what we have committed with everybody else. Are we together? We're saying we have made some changes. We have made those changes permanent at this current time. We have described what those changes were. Now we want those changes to be available for everybody else. So what that means is, if you can see here, there's a synchronization activity warning or a notification that says we have one change that we need to push. You see the arrow is pointing up. So far, we have nothing that we need to pull according to what it is thinking. Because from time to time, it should be able to synchronize and tell you that somebody else has pushed. So I'll run the git status again so that we're together. It says your branch is ahead of origin by one commit. Use git push to publish your local commits here. And that is exactly what we're going to do. Git push. So when you do this for the first time as well, it will ask you to register yourself. You'll use your email address that you use on GitHub and your password that you use on GitHub, so that you register that you are the person who is making the changes. So far here, it's telling me that there's work online that I don't have because somebody else made some changes. I hope you're following. You see there's an error. We failed to push because there are some changes that happen online that I don't have in my current repository. So the responsible thing to do is you do a git pull to fetch all the changes that were done online. What it's telling me is that it created a README file. The README file that we were reading was created online, but we didn't have the copy of the README in our local machine. Now that we have pulled, you will notice also that it tells us that it has merged. It tells us that it has merged the two files using a recursive strategy. All that means is if we were working on the same file and you made some changes maybe on the top half and I made some changes on the bottom half, Git is able to figure out that different parts of the page or the application were amended or changed by different people. And then it can juggle it. If there's a conflict, it will tell us. We'll look at conflicts in a bit. But basically, it can tell us that, well, there's a new file here that you don't have. Then you have a new file that the other person doesn't have, and it puts them everything in order. Then it looks at if we had touched the same file. I'll say touched. If you had worked on the same file that I'm working on, it will also tell us where we have made similar changes. Right. So when that happens, we'll meet it just now, but we have pulled, it has merged. Now we push. Right. Now that's done. Let's go back to the online version. Initially, we started off with 2 commits. Let's see what we have now. Now we have 4 commits. Seems all the commits were by me. Everybody else is being lazy today. I don't blame you. But when we get to working, we'll be able to see who made what kind of change, when did they make the change, why did they make the change, because there are messages. So what is important as we work in a team is to be able to communicate the changes that we made, to communicate why we made the changes that we made, so that everybody else who's working in the team can benefit and assist each other going forward. So the first commit was done when we created the application. The second commit was done online by creating the README. The third commit was done when we created the registration component. And the last commit was done when we merged the 2 different versions of the applications. We didn't merge them specifically, Git merged them for us. So just to wrap up, commit, pull, push, and then you'll be good to go. Right, that's how far we'll go with version control. I wonder if anybody has any questions while I prepare the next section. Right, no questions. That's okay. So as we continue, we realize that as we write more and more code together as a group collaborating on the project, we may find that the same file that you're working on was accidentally changed by somebody else. Git has been prepared in order to let you know when that happens, so that when it does happen, you are able to solve it amicably. Right, guys? Sorry, I think we are running low on time, but I will continue. There's not much left that we have to talk about. Yeah, I'll just continue. I'll wrap up. Right. I was saying, in the event that we're working on the same file, where you make your changes and I make my changes, and Git cannot resolve, cannot put the changes together into one meaningful file, Git will let us know that a conflict has occurred. And then when that happens, it will suggest that we have a look at the file where the conflicts have occurred, so that we're able to resolve the conflicts by removing from one, the head. If you want to remove what's coming from outside, or the tail, if you want to remove what you have in your local version, or you can actually even remove all of the versions. But I guess we'll have to talk about conflicts and conflict resolution when we actually have an example of a conflict. As it is, I'm the only person contributing to the application. But when we start creating more and more components in our remote areas, we'll actually see what we're talking about. So to wrap up, today we talked about version control. We also talked about beefing up VSCode to become very functional for Angular development. When we talked about version control, we talked about declaring the changes that we've made and justifying the changes by giving a message as to why we made the change. Then we talked about synchronizing our versions, our local versions of code, by pulling code that has already been shared to our main repository into our local version. Then when all of the loose ends have been tied up, we want to go back and let everybody share what we ourselves have done. I think for today, our 1 hour is 2 minutes away from being over. If anybody has a quick question, raise your hand, and then we'll try and see how to extend the meeting. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll end here and continue next Sunday as well, same time. Have a good morning.